Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with the conflict that is in Yemen. After a few days of heavy Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, the Houthis have claimed to have killed at least 8 Saudi soldiers. Houthi spokesman forces were stationed in the Marib governorate with a ballistic missile. Saudi Arabia did not comment on the Marib assault, but Saudi media reported the death of a lieutenant colonel without specifying where he was killed. I mean, it's normal for the Saudis to stay quiet about successful Houthi assaults. The Marib attack came after airstrikes from the US-backed Saudi-led coalition were carried out in several cities across northern Yemen. Some media outlets framed the airstrikes as a retaliation for Houthi missile attacks on a Saudi oil facility in Jeddah that took place last week, something I had covered in the previous videos. Now, at least one civilian was killed in the Saudi airstrikes on Friday in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The Houthi-run Al-Masirah news said one civilian was killed and another was wounded during Saudi shelling in the city of Sada on Sunday. Now, personally, I would urge the international community to push for both sides to come to the table and end the war as soon as possible. It is time for the Saudi and the Yemenis to end the war and stop caring about saving face. Moving on to a little bit in the north, in the border between Syria and Iraq, an airstrike killed a commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard at the border sometime over the weekend, the Iraqi security and local militia officials said on Monday. Now, officials could not confirm the identity of the commander, who they said was killed alongside 3 other men traveling in a vehicle with them. The vehicle was carrying weapons across the Iraqi border and was hit after it had entered Syrian territory, 2 Iraqi security officials separately told Reuters. The Iran-backed Iraqi paramilitary groups helped retrieve the bodies, the 2 officials said, without elaborating or giving the exact time of the incident. The Lebanon-based Al-Mayadeen TV channel, which is close to the Syrian government and Lebanese Hezbollah, said that trusted sources have denied the assassination of an Iranian commander and 3 of his bodyguards. Several Arab media reports have identified the commander as Muslim Shahdan. The reported incident comes just days after the Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated in Tehran in an operation that Iran has blamed on Israel. Dozens of Iran-backed fighters have been killed in, in Israeli strikes in Syria over the past month, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. A top-level UAE source told Middle East Eye on Monday that Iran has sent a warning to the United Arab Emirates in case of a US attack on Iran. Now, it seems that the US and Israel, as of yet, is taking full advantage of the current situation, and they are killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On the one side, they kill any perceived enemy in the region with the number of airstrikes that Israel and supposedly Israel and USA is conducting, while also boxing the incoming US president. Now let's look at the Iranian response to this so far. The Iranian parliament on Tuesday advanced a bill that would end the UN inspection of its nuclear facility and require the government to boost its uranium enrichment if European signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal do not provide the relief from oil and banking sanctions. The vote to debate the bill, which would need to pass through several other stages before becoming law, was a show of defiance after the killing of a prominent Iranian nuclear scientist last month. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has the final say on all nuclear policies. The official IRNA news agency said 251 lawmakers in the 290-seat chamber voted in favor after which many began chanting the usual "Death to America" and "Death to Israel." The bill would give European countries 3 months to ease sanctions on Iran's key oil and gas sector and to restore its access to the international banking system. The bill would have authorities resume enriching uranium to 20%, which is below the threshold needed for nuclear weapons, but higher than that required for civilian applications. It would also commission new centrifuges at nuclear facilities at Natanz and the underground Fordo site. Parliament would need to hold another vote to pass the bill, which would also require approval of the Guardian Council, a constitutional watchdog. Lawmakers have pressed for a more confrontational approach since the US withdrew from the nuclear agreements in 2018. Cabinet spokesman Ali Rabiei acknowledged that the limitations of such an approach on Tuesday, saying that the nuclear file is under the authority of the Supreme National Security Council and, quote, nobody can work on it independently, end quote. President Hassan Rouhani, a relatively moderate, heads the council, which answers to the supreme leader. The International Atomic Energy Agency says that, quote unquote, structured program had ended in 2003. The US intelligence agencies concurred with that assessment in a 2007 report. Israel still insists Iran maintains the ambition of developing nuclear weapons, pointing to Tehran's ballistic missile program and research into other technologies. Iran long has maintained that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Some Iranian officials have suggested that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has been regularly inspecting Iran's nuclear facilities in recent years as part of the 2015 agreement, may have been a source of intelligence for Fakhrizade's killers. Iran began publicly exceeding uranium enrichment levels set by the nuclear agreement after the US restored sanctions. It currently enriches a growing uranium stockpile up to 4.5% purity. That's still far below weapons grade levels of 90%, though experts warn Iran now has enough low enriched uranium to reprocess into fuel for at least 2 atomic bombs if it chose to pursue them. Now it seems Iran has learned the lesson of Libyan dictator Gaddafi of not giving a nuclear program, real or perceived, completely if you don't want the US to invade and to do a regime change there. Of course, the Libyan problem was completely on Obama administration, and the current problem is mostly on, I would say, Israel, which has, let's just say, made foolish mistakes when it comes to the Iranian equation. Anyhow, moving on, the NATO think there's been a bit of a change in the NATO. It seems that NATO is thinking of becoming harder to. They're thinking of new policies on how to handle China and its military rise, but NATO maintains that Russia will remain its main adversary during the decade, according to a report which is to be published on Tuesday on reforming the Atlantic Alliance. The report, the quote unquote NATO 2030, prepared by a group of so-called wise persons and containing 138 proposals, comes amid growing doubts about the purpose and relevance of an alliance branded last year by the French President Emmanuel Macron as quote unquote brain dead. Part of NATO's response should be maintaining a technological advantage over China, Jesus, protecting computer networks and infrastructure, the diplomat said, citing the report, although not all recommendations will be adopted. The 30-member alliance could also forge closer ties with non-NATO countries such as Australia and focus more on deterrence in space, where China is developing assets, the report suggested. In comments on Monday ahead of report's publication, NATO Security NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said China's rise posed, quote, important challenges to our security, end quote. NATO should consider including China in NATO's official master strategy document, its, quote unquote, strategic concept, diplomats cited the report as saying, though it will stop short of declaring the country an adversary. In other recommendations, the report will suggest that NATO foreign ministers meet more regularly and will call for a strengthening of the Secretary General's role as the international mediator. The report will be discussed by NATO foreign ministers on Tuesday before being presented to the alliance's head of state and government next year. However, Eastern European allies, fearful of Russia since Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea from Ukraine, are concerned about the shifting too many resources away from NATO's core task of defending Europe. Now, I think it is a good idea that we maintain the strong military alliance, and I think the repurposing of NATO to be used as a way to counter a threat from Beijing is good. However, my fear is that we may forget that the real objective is not to fight the Chinese, but rather to translate our strength into extracting a sort of concession if we can, but more importantly, maintain a certain level of security in the region. My personal view is that we mustn't rely overtly in the military alone. We should use other avenues as well. And one of them would be to allow our media to expose the Chinese corruption to the Chinese people, importantly. Anyhow, moving on to our last story of this video is the Nagorno-Karabakh region situation, which is between the Armenia and Azerbaijan. So far, the Azerbaijani soldiers on Tuesday hoisted their country's flag in the final district given up by Armenia under a peace deal that ended weeks of fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. A column of Azerbaijani military trucks entered the Lachin district overnight, taking over the last three regions around Karabakh handed over by Armenia under the Russian-brokered agreement. AFP journalists saw soldiers raising the Azerbaijani flag over an administrative building in the town of Lachin in the early hours. Armenia agreed to hand over the three districts, namely the Aghdam, Lachin, and Kalbajar, as part of the November deal that stopped an Azerbaijani offensive that had reclaimed swaths of territory lost to Armenian separatists in the 1990s war. Most of the town's residents fled in advance of the takeover. Now, in a televised address on Tuesday, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev celebrated the dawn of quote unquote a new reality. Moscow's defense ministry on Tuesday said it had so far assisted in the return of more than 26,000 people. It said its peacekeepers had also cleared mines along the Lachin corridor and helped restore a power line destroyed during the fighting. Moscow's peacemaker role has overshadowed France and the United States, the three countries that formed the Minsk group, which led talks on the Karabakh conflict for decades but failed to achieve a lasting agreement. Now, I think this is a good time for both Armenia and Azerbaijan to sit down and start talking about the future of their relation and work out the thorny issues as well as work on healing the wounds of the war. Now is not the time to waste. It is time to have a dialogue on the issues that are sticking out. Because the longer they wait, a sort of, how would I say, a sort of reluctance will take over the both governments to engage. Well, that's it for this video. If you like the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticisms, and anything I might have missed. And as usual, these